So then, I guess just to kind of back up then. So when you were doing these practices, and they were just kind of opening the doors of different modes of consciousness, let's say,
Yes.
and you started allowing yourself to be more in tune with certain God forms. Was there any specific God form that just kind of resonated with you that that just I mean, to put it from like a Christian lens, a lot of folks when they're praying to the saints, they're in tuning that spiritual form of that saint, right, within themselves.
Right.
But when you were first getting started, which God, I guess, kind of gave you the most positive experiences that you had just getting going?
I think as a child it would have been Krishna and Shiva. Those two things as a child I felt very connected to. And then I had very beautiful experiences with Ganesh. And so
Oh God, yeah.
that kind of really colored my world, and everything kind of exploded from there.
Ganesh was the only Hindu based god that I've ever had an experience with. Even to the point that like I dream about him, and I was never really into Hinduism. Whenever I mean, to the extent that I'd read a couple Wikipedia articles, and whenever I'm at a music festival and I see the guy taking donations for a book, no matter what, I just get one.
Right,
I
right, right.
always buy a book, and I've always like tried to put the effort into reading them, but the names just get so confusing, primarily different places, that I just get so lost in my dyslexia that I could never follow through. But Ganesh was one of those beings that like it just made me feel so calm and at peace. And I mean, the entire dream I had is I was like floating up, and the tube that I was floating up ended up being a tunnel. That was kind of morphing into a hallway, and there I am in this like lavish room with all these fancy silk curtains everywhere, and lamps, and you're sitting before this supreme Godhead, you right? And what does he do? He offers you a piece of candy.
That's beautiful.
I mean, it just resonated with me. He's a fat man's god, so I'm all about it. And so, Ganesh, I've always put him in different paintings whenever I have the time to. I used to have a little, shrine set up to him that I'd give out offerings here and there. But I've never really looked at Hinduism as a spiritual path. So, I guess if I were to want to shift my consciousness in that direction, what would a mediocre Western based, also born Lutheran guy do to kind of shift his mind in that perspective?
Well. First of all, thank you for sharing that beautiful experience of Ganesh. I loved hearing that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say that you kind of revealed two things with that. Anyone who has an experience that a dream or a connection like that, that it already shows that those kind of types of cosmic forces are already communicating with you and are at least open to communicating with you. And Ganesh is particularly propitious one because Ganesh rules the earth plane, rules the earth dimension, and is the gatekeeper, the doorkeeper. And but it's also brings such sweet peace and balance to our lives. And so it's a wonderful one to just consistently honor. And I always encourage anyone, if they don't know what to do but they're interested in Hinduism, to always kind of see if they have a connection to Ganesh, to study Ganesh, because he is the first place we should start. It's very gentle. He's a gatekeeper, a doorkeeper, much like Legba is in esoteric Vodun traditions. We
Right,
see that
right,
there's some kind of gatekeeper there. Same
right.
idea. But Ganesh is beautiful because Ganesh has such a deep connection to Shiva and the goddess, both. And so it's this beautiful energy for that. So I would encourage you to, for the rest of your life, at least always offer a candle to Ganesh and images and continue to draw with him. It's a beautiful cosmic force.
Well, I mean, yeah, he definitely gave me a Sandolphin vibe. He's
Hmm.
definitely very welcoming, but at the same time, I don't want to say standoffish, but stern in his approach, right? Um,
Right, right.
he definitely hasn't come back in any specific visions well outside of psychedelic experiences. I'm talking about specifically dreams. But I mean, working with just that God form, it's definitely a very harmonizing energy. And I guess kind of looking at the connectivity between like Ganesh, the angel Sandalphon, and you also mentioned Papa Legba from the
Hmm.
Voodoo traditions. So when you perceive these God forms and you try and rationalize it, are these just like certain interdimensional energy points that are so that can't be perceived with a rational mind, so they have to be expressed through a subjective experience?
I think I personally take the stance that these God forms that we experience or we can communicate with are distinct discarnate intelligences that exist in many different dimensions. I definitely don't see them as any kind of like psychological symbol or some kind of like symbol that we're trying to break down and kind of assure ourselves that it's not real. To me, these are very live, discrete entities
Mm-hmm.
that exist in other dimensions and that for various reasons either seek to communicate with us or through because of our own unique karma, we already have previous connections to them and they open up with that. And that's a kind of a fundamental idea in Eastern traditions is that this lifetime we have right now is definitely not the first one according to their perspective. And we've got a vast past experience of connections and things that are going on. And so I think that's a fundamental idea. Even my recent book, Cult of Golgotha, was all talking about some of these ideas.
Right, right, and well, I definitely want to touch on your theories about Golgotha a little bit later. Primarily as it acts as a specific gateway over to the other side.
Right.
But I guess I should rephrase that question. So, do you think the human mind is limited in a way that because we can't experience these beings in full, that we have to symbolically perceive them because our mind just can't handle that full splendor or that direct communication?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I think that the majority of people's nervous system is not able to accept or to tolerate an experience of that, mainly through due to societal conditioning and through how they live their lives. However, our brain and our consciousness can be two different things. From an Eastern perspective, consciousness is much above the brain. See, the Western mind says, no, the brain is our consciousness. But in Eastern thought, we would say, no, the brain is just the house of consciousness. The
Right.
consciousness exists somewhere else. Even in medical, as a medical practitioner, we know that in our gut we have a second brain. There's a whole other enteric nervous system that exists independent of the brain, and they actually can control the brain. So I think that number one, that depending on one's esoteric practice, they can either have a more direct experience with these luminous or numinous beings, or they need a more symbolic practice. But also, too, I think that the mind works in symbols. The soul doesn't speak in literal words. It speaks
Hmm.
in poetic forms. It speaks in artistic forms. And so I think that that's why many of these minds, and we can even look at ideas from the Vedas, where the rishis from India were writing in very kind of like symbolic language, where one word meant 10 different things depending on how you used it. That's how Sanskrit's created. So I think that's one of the ideas is that so it depends on the person, it depends on the experience, it depends on the person's training, and then it depends on the person's karma. But that's what our yogic practice is always seeking to do is to decondition the mind, decondition the nervous system so that we can have the most pure and direct contact with these intelligence as we can.
Right, right. Well, I mean, and I guess that preparation is everything because, from a Western perspective, then, I mean, what you're really doing is you're preparing for the creation. Well, I wouldn't say the creation necessarily, but the connection with, your your individual personality with that solar consciousness, and then eventually that solar body once you can raise yourself to it. So I guess what sort of things that should we start out with to try and condition our mind to try and perceive these things?
I think number one is most people need to learn to purify their senses, and that typically comes through kind of starting to limit how much artificial stimuli they're receiving.
Hmm.
And that's obviously a controversial thing because most of everything we exist in now is artificial, right? Artificial light, artificial sound,
Right, right.
technology. So I think learning to return back to nature and spending time within the actual elements, spending a lot of time in the nature, around water, around mountains, around all the five elements, becomes very, very important for both healing our nervous system, but also kind of deconditioning and letting our nervous system calm down. And the more remote we are with our connection to nature, the harder and harder it can be to have contact with these things. And so that's number one. Number two would be the actual health of the nervous system via diet and via the health of the physical body. And so those things have to start somewhere in those levels.